Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad to be here. This is session 14 of Leland's MBA week. There's one more session after this. The QR code to sign up for Leland is on this cover slide, so check that out. Just a housekeeping note, this session is being recorded. We'll send the recording out this weekend. We have just 45 minutes in this session today, so let's dive in. First, I want to introduce myself. I'm Laura Nelson. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about me before diving into our agenda on how to stand out as a non-traditional applicant. I was an art major at Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm also a full-time MBA graduate of Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, where I was a member of the admissions committee. Before business school, I worked in film and television. So one of the reasons I love working with non-traditional candidates is because I was in your exact same position years ago. Nevertheless, I earned a sizable merit scholarship, concentrated in marketing and strategy as an MBA student, and I competed as the only grad student on the University of Michigan Collegiate Women's Synchronized Skating team. Since graduation, I've worked for over a decade in tech, in GM, and marketing leadership roles. I've also been an admissions consultant for the last 14 years with two of the top firms and my own consultancy. So I've worked with hundreds of candidates. Lastly, I'm a member of AGAC, which is an association of graduate admissions consulting professionals, which accredits its members and gives us access to admissions committees. We had our annual conference in New York earlier this month, and I picked up a lot of great tidbits straight from the admissions directors themselves. So enough about me. Let's hear from you. Now that you've learned a little more about me, I'd love to learn where you're coming from. So in the chat, if you could share what your most recent job or career path is. I'll give you just a minute to do so. Awesome, seeing some great responses. A lot of military, marketing and tech, B2B consulting, ops, insurance, compensation, HR. Ooh, program management, astronomy, that's interesting. Journalism, love it. Looks like we have an awesome range here today. So I hope what follows is useful to you and your process. So let's dive into this agenda. So first, we're going to discuss a few common misconceptions about the MBA class. Then we're going to take a look at some of the data. What do class profiles look like for some of the top programs? And what does it reveal about the opportunities for you, the non-traditional candidate? We're then going to discuss how to start constructing your career narrative, particularly with that short-term goal in mind. I'll also highlight how some non-traditional candidates have tackled some of the more common essays, and finally touch on how you can address any perceived weaknesses in your profile. Finally, I'll leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat, but it's not always possible while I'm talking. So if I miss your question throughout, feel free to post it at the end when we tackle Q&A. So let's get after it. Starting with the common myths. A lot of people have an idea of, who goes to business school and who does not. And if you're anything like me, this may be your impression of business and business professionals at this stage. You might be interested in business. You might have friends in business roles. It might look pretty cool to you, but you might have no idea what these people do every day. If that's you, I get it. This was me a few years ago. I was interested in business, but I was still finding my path. So what do business professionals do? It turns out a lot of things. I'm often asked as a consultant about what type of candidate a program is looking for and what profile succeeds. To answer that question, I'm going to first address those common myths and what types are not necessarily the end-all be-all in business programs. So let's take a look at the common myths about what MBA admissions committees are looking for. There are commonly held perceptions about MBAs, including that they have business degrees, they have business jobs and careers, they're executives in leadership roles, they're quant jocks, they're mostly men, they're perfect. And while some of this is true of some programs, although no one's perfect, right? I'm going to address these one by one using real data from MBA class profiles at the top programs, including highlighting a couple programs from each. So first, let's talk about business degrees. They're not necessary for business schools. So take a look at the stats from Booth. Half of the Booth class does not have a business or econ degree. 2/3 of the Wharton class does not have a business degree. So as a non-traditional applicant, I hope you find that compelling because there's opportunity for you. Let's take a look at those pre-MBA careers. A wide variety of industries are represented across the top programs. So while 55% of CBS classmates have roles in either business or economics, a sizable portion of the class are coming from other industries. And you can see the breakdown in this chart. This breakout is even more apparent at Yale School of Management, which itemizes a wide variety of industries on this chart. Next, let's take a look at work experience. So not everyone who comes to business school is a manager or an executive. This often isn't the case with someone who has an average of 5 years of work experience. So Berkeley House's 80% range goes from 3.2 on the low end of years of work experience up to 8.2. A lot of variety can happen in that range. The average tenure at HBS for incoming students is 5 years work experience. And you'll see that average pretty consistently across some of the top programs. Next, let's talk about quant capabilities. Tests are just one way to assess a person's capabilities, but they're not the only way. So check out the middle 80% ranges at all of your target programs. So Fuqua shares the range for GMAT, which has an 80-point spread. However, they don't break out the specifics for the GRE, as you see here. MIT Sloan generally has strong averages for their programs, but they also have some flexibility in their 80% ranges. Next, let's look at gender representation. While it's true that women have not achieved 50% representation at many of the top programs, the numbers have really been growing year over year. Here's a look at where they stand at Kellogg and Ross in their most recent class profiles. This is not quite 50%, but not far off. So it's hardly male dominant. And as you probably know, the other professional grad schools are more equal and many have more women than men. Finally, I'm going to touch on this idea of perfection. So admissions committees are looking for real people to join their classes, and no one's perfect. It's okay if you've faced adversity. It's more important that you've overcome it and learned how to manage it. It's okay if you haven't solved the world's greatest problems. It's more important to give insight into how you think. So here's a high-level view of a couple of the top programs' admissions criteria. I share this data not just to help you calibrate with your scores, your grades, your characteristics, and more, but to show that people from all walks of life and paths can be successful in business school. And I'm a great example of that. If you make the case that an MBA is a critical part of your career journey, you can find a place in business school. So business school is not just for any one profile, but really the classes are comprised of a mix of profiles that the admissions committee are after. So it's to their benefit and to the benefit of the cohort to create the most interesting and diverse class possible across a range of factors. So I hope that's helpful. And again, if you're looking for class profile info, you can simply Google class profile MBA and your target program. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about creating your narrative. Think about the MBA as a bridge to your future. So I view the admissions process as the ultimate marketing exercise where applicants must effectively position their candidacies and message their experiences and perspectives to sell themselves to programs. So career counseling, this is a natural extension of the process, especially if you're coming from a non-traditional professional background. So I want to emphasize that the admissions process is not just about fitting into what the AdCom expects of you. Rather, it's a challenge to differentiate yourself and stand out from the crowd. And as a non-traditional applicant, you have a leg up in this challenge, which is great. What you need to do as part of this process is prove that business school is the right next step for you and that you're poised to tackle the curriculum and the recruiting process. So in the next section, I'm going to talk about how to construct that career narrative, as I think this is one of the most challenging parts of the application process for non-traditional candidates. I think the photo here is a great image to keep in mind as you think about how the MBA enables you to go from where you are today, which is on the left side, to where you want to be on the right side, and think of the MBA program as bridging that gap in between. So here's a few worksheets to help you start constructing that story. I'm going to walk you through a few exercises that are hopefully going to help you nail down your career arc. If you haven't done something like this already, I highly recommend that you take an hour or two to walk through these sometime after this presentation wraps and before you embark on your application. It's going to be super helpful and streamline your process, I promise. So first, this is a very simple exercise that describes where you are today in terms of your career and where you want to be. This type of simple sentence is going to form the basis of your elevator pitch, your online response in a video interview or in a live interview, and also be present in short answers and might be the backbone of some of your career essays. So very simple exercise. This might take you just a few minutes. The next exercise is about getting tactical on what type of job you want to pursue. So here I have an example of a med tech marketing manager role at J&J, but you can peruse your target companies and industries to find what makes sense for you. So what do you do next? First, take a look at what the role is all about, right? You'll find that pretty high up in the job description. Then learn what the position demands in terms of both hard and soft skills and experiences. Next, here's where you're going to map your skills and capabilities. Ask yourself these questions. Which of these skills and experiences do I have? Which of them do I need? How will the MBA experience help me get them? And which specific courses, programs, extracurriculars, and more facilitate this goal? So if you do some of this work upfront, again, you're going to save yourself a lot of time when it comes to writing your essays. You're also going to be able to easily define what are my short-term goals, why am I a good fit to pursue them, and importantly, why do I need an MBA and why this program? So hopefully that gives you a framework for starting to shape up your short-term goals. Next, I'm going to move into storytelling a bit because essays are often what takes applicants the most time as part of the process. And essays also cause some of the most anxiety as part of the process too. So whether you're non-traditional or traditional applicant, you can of course benefit from some of the pointers that I'm going to go over as they relate to the essays. So again, storytelling, keep that idea at the forefront, because here's a few general tips that I'm going to review. And then I'll share a few examples from some of my non-traditional candidates from past years. And the first tip is show, don't tell. So think about your essays as personal narratives. Take the reader to the center of the action. This can involve a stressful moment at work, a failure, an emotional, personal journey, a point of inspiration, or something else. There are endless possibilities here. But remember that the essays are an opportunity to stand out and share something unique about you and something that you've experienced. So I encourage you to bring the passion. Break free from that 5-paragraph essay format that we all learned in high school, and that was drilled into our brains. You don't need an intro, paragraph, and thesis statement like you do in that format, right? You might not also need a conclusion summarizing the same points, especially if you're trying to meet a short word count. The next tip is to create a strong hook to engage the reader off the bat. This might be a quote, a story, a point of conflict to draw the reader in and differentiate your story and experiences from those of other candidates too. Give them a reason to want to read more. The third point here is to write your essays from a point of view that is personal and authentic. And I can't emphasize this enough because we hear it over and over from admissions committee directors. So resist the urge to be overly formal. And while I wouldn't say be too casual in your wording, tell a story that could only be told by you in your own words. So next, I'm going to go through a few examples. We're probably not going to have time for you to read them all on screen, but I'm just going to point out a couple things that I think make these effective essays. And if you want to read more about them, definitely watch the recording later on. So again, here's a few specific examples of these essays. The first tip I gave you guys was show, don't tell. And this reader does a great job in describing what led her to pursue real estate. She had this inspiration from her family early on in her life, and she talks about how it stuck with her, right? She uses that narrative to really describe her career goals in an effective way rather than just stating them plainly. Next example is about creating a strong hook. So this writer took the reader to the center of the action in her volunteering story. So she shared a moment of vulnerability, and this is perfectly okay for these type of essays to talk about vulnerability, about failure and conflict, because again, admissions committees are looking for people who can respond to these situations, who can demonstrate change, right? We are all humans, and humans are reading these stories too. Definitely keep that in mind. Here's an example that I thought was very successful rather in being personal and authentic. So this writer shared a personal story on how she connects with others and celebrates the holidays in response to Berkeley House's prompt, how she truly feels alive. She mentions things don't always go as planned in these dinners, but she reveals what she finds exhilarating about these experiences. So these are 3 quick examples on how you can tackle some of the essay prompts, but please don't feel limited by these examples. These are just a small peek at the possibilities. So I'm often asked by non-traditional candidates, whether they can overcome, a certain perceived weakness in their profile. So I thought I would spend a little time with you guys today talking about how you might need to address these or improve upon them as part of your candidacy. Here's a few that I've come across over the last few years, along with some prescriptions for improvement. The first one is low test scores or a low GPA. These are not deal breakers on their own, but do everything you can to address them in your MBA application. This includes taking the test again, or maybe trying another test if the particular program accepts that. We saw examples of GMAT, GRE. Some programs offer the EA, for example. Next tip is to enroll in a pre-MBA course. make sure it's graded. You'll get a little more credit for that as part of the process. I like UCLA and UC Berkeley's extensions pre-MBA courses. They're self-paced and you can finish them up in a couple months, which can be helpful for the timeline we're talking about if you're aiming for round one. A substitute, or not a perfect substitute for that, but if you're a little more time constricted, take a look at MBA math. There's a grid on their site that shows which schools value this experience. It's also very practical work in Excel to beef up your skills before enrolling in an MBA. So if a course is out of the realm, consider MBA math. And of course, if you have to address a low GPA or low test score, leverage that optional essay in your application to describe the circumstances. This is not to say you need to tell a whole drawn out story about all of the circumstances that surrounded a bad semester in undergrad. You can certainly touch on that. But what's more important is that you acknowledge that you point to examples that show some of your strengths, and hopefully there are instances where you can also demonstrate growth. The next perceived weakness is a lack of business and or quant experience. So when I work with candidates who are coming from a non-traditional background and might be concerned that they don't have the applicable skills, we always emphasize transferable skills. So this goes back to the exercise with the job listing. Many non-traditional applicants are making career pivots. And while it may be difficult, it's not impossible, because those transferable skills are going to go a long way. And then what you take from the MBA program is going to help fill in the rest. On a tactical level, I recommend adding metrics and analytical experience to your resume and wherever else is appropriate in the application. I'm going to add one more note that's not on this slide, which is a lack of formal management experience. I touched on that and the common myths about MBA candidates. So many candidates, they don't go to business school with formal supervisory experience, and that's perfectly okay. So describe when you've taken initiative and shown leadership capabilities, and that will definitely suffice for the leadership qualities that MBA admissions committees are looking for in their candidates. So I know this is a lot to digest, but I wanted to give us plenty of time at the end here to take your questions. So again, feel free to go back to the chat and ask your questions. I want to get to as many as possible. Definitely use this QR code if you're trying to reach my page on Leland to schedule an intro call. I have an amazing discount that's good through July 15th. It's 20% off for the hourly and package services. And yeah, I'll pause while you think of your questions. Feel free to share them in the chat. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, the recording will be sent out this weekend. If you want to take a deeper dive into the worksheets that I prepared, in addition to reading those essay examples in their entirety. So got a question from Shay. What is the best way to tell your story when you want to make a career pivot for skills you don't yet have? So I think that goes back to the career mapping, that short-term goal exercise that I talked about in the worksheet section. Most likely, you will have some skills that can transfer to that career. And your argument or your purpose for pursuing an MBA is going to help facilitate the rest, right? So each and every job description has a blend of soft skills and hard skills that they're looking for. And you can really, hone in on the soft skills, for example, that you have and can bring to succeed in that environment. And say you're changing functions, that's where the MBA is going to be really useful in helping fill those knowledge gaps and ensuring that you are set up for success in that role. Question from Ken Wu, do you have any general rules or advice for applicants with only military work experience? The great news is that admissions committees love working with veterans. They love that they love the leadership skills that veterans bring. And I would say a similar line about emphasizing those transferable skills that are definitely going to be an asset in the workplace. So the veterans I've worked with in, MBA admissions, like bring leadership, bring resourcefulness, and, a ton of other very necessary qualities for MBA and business careers to the process. They're just looking for, other professional knowledge to supplement, what they have to land that next role. Had a question here about pre-specific MBA courses at UCLA or UC Berkeley Extension that I would highly recommend. I would search specifically for that pre-MBA curriculum. So I believe it's UCLA that has a certificate in this. You don't have to take them all and get a certificate, but if you are taking a course to bring up your quant capabilities, I would aim for something more quant oriented. So it might be econ, it might be stats. I think there's a pre-MBA math course that's a little more general. Like one of those from that pre-MBA certificate should help you out. I had an interesting question from Rocky regarding failure as a potential story for essays. So Rocky asks, what are the criteria a failure must have to make a good first story? I've made mistakes that I've definitely learned from, but what takes a failure story to a great important change moment in your life story? It kind of depends on the prompt asked. So I guess I don't have enough detail to comment on your specific example in particular. But when I think about, certain questions that are asking about values, growth, self-discovery, and there are many of them at the top programs, these stories of personal transformation and learning show humility, show flexibility, and can be great narratives for essays. Tanvi asks, do some schools offer more provisions for or are more open to non-traditional candidates than others? The reason that I highlighted the class profiles of a lot of the top programs is that we see a lot of diversity in terms of backgrounds and undergrad degrees across a lot of the top programs. What makes the experience so valuable for the students is that, they're not just meeting other consultants and bankers, right? That used to be the case decades ago at business school. And thankfully that's changed where a lot of different, career paths and ambitions can find themselves in business school and be successful. And when you talk to MBA students, that's one of the leading reasons that they say, they gain value from the experience is that, we have so many different types of people here who are trying to, who are aiming for ambitious goals of many different varieties that, that's what the top programs do really well. So all of that to say, many of the top programs are looking for candidates just like you who are not following a traditional path. Great question here from AL or Al. Do you have any advice for those who got laid off earlier this year? How should we best recover from this? Should we wait until next year to apply when we have a job? So pre-COVID, it used to be very risky to apply to business school without a job. But COVID really shook things up because there were a lot of layoffs when COVID hit. People were reevaluating their lives and their plans. And We saw a lot of admits from people who were, caught in a position without a job and reevaluating their plans and deciding that now was the right time for them to go to business school. So if everything else, all else being equal, like if now's the time for you, I wouldn't dissuade you from applying this year, right? Keep doing other things in your life, keep volunteering, keep active with your extracurriculars. If you need a job, obviously keep looking for a job. But what we have found in the last few cycles is that not having a job is not a deal breaker. Address this in your optional essay, have a plan, but do not let this hold you back from applying this year. I have a question from Swati about a gap in work experience. Advice for older applicants who would like to get in the full-time MBA program. 4-year gap due to personal reasons. How can I best showcase my application? Total work experience is around 8 years. So you'd be on the higher end of work experience at some of the programs, but this is not out of the ranges, right? Leverage that optional essay to talk about that 4-year gap. Make sure that's consistent across your LinkedIn profile as well. We're seeing a lot more lenience for these situations where people have to step away from their professional lives, take care of themselves, take care of their families. So I wouldn't let that be a deterrent for you either. Jack asks, having a liberal arts background, do you recommend that I acknowledge my lack of finance business background in my essay, either optional or required? Jack, this is going to come through in your transcript. So I don't know that you need to point it out. I think you make this a positive and talk about why a business degree is important for where you want to go with your career. I would say if you have D's and F's in, say, business courses, of course, you're going to have to offset that with a course, with a great test score, with an optional essay, but I don't think you need to point it out just for the sake of pointing it out to the AdCom. Erin asks, is it helpful or hurtful focusing on having a non-traditional undergrad education that led into a non-traditional early career? Or does this make you come across as prestige hungry, trying too hard to hop on the more traditional track? I don't think this is hurtful at all. I mean, I can relate to this a lot in that, I came from non-traditional undergrad education, which is fine art, which led to a non-traditional early career, which was film and TV. And, my original goal was to transition over to the business side of the entertainment industry. I ended up finding my way into tech, but I didn't, there were other candidates like me, right? And it's, it is a mechanism to make that career change with credibility. So I don't think that is hurtful for your candidacy. Victor asks about family business. This is another area I love because I grew up with a family business. Any recommendations for international candidates working in their family business in a foreign country? Previously worked at a startup in the US. I think what's great about family businesses is that you can potentially have your hand in a number of areas and take on a lot more responsibility. So that's something really to showcase, that leadership in your application, right? All of that functional knowledge that you've gained in working with customers, suppliers, depending on the industry, of course. I don't think that's a deterrent. I have worked with candidates coming from other countries who have worked in a family business. A lot of the skills are similar to what you would develop at a startup in the US, where you have to be scrappy. I think the tricky part comes when you're looking for recommendations, can't have family members write them. So you've got to, reach out to clients, suppliers, partners, et cetera, to get those recommendations. Thomas asks, any advice on how to craft a narrative that details being a first-gen college student? I've worked with many first-gen college students, and this can be part of your narrative. I'd have to know about your story more specifically to advise on what that looks like for your specific program. but I did work with a candidate last year who was first gen from the Philippines, and she had, her family had come over, one by one, and faced a lot of hardships acclimating to the US and the culture and so forth. And she talked about overcoming those challenges and what it was like for her in undergrad, and how she found her confidence through her professional career. So certainly there is a narrative to be told. I would need to know more about your particular situation to advise more specifically. I'm going to go up a little bit because I skipped some, but Chirag asks, how important is GMAT score for someone who has relatively less GPA in undergrad, but has decent work experience in different domains? So a lot of candidates are not perfect across the board, right? You might fall below the average in some area or the other. And if you attend info sessions for programs and listen to how the admissions directors talk about this, they're really looking at your total candidacy, right? You might have some weaknesses in an area or two, but strengths in other areas that help offset them. So the GMAT score, the GPA, those are only components of your overall candidacy. Obviously you can lean into this decent work experience in different domains to help offset that and to help differentiate your candidacy. Connor asks, do you have any advice for military members who want to use an MBA to pursue entrepreneurship? This is a pretty non-traditional pre-post MBA experience. It is, but I kind of love it. You've got the, scrappiness through your work experience to date, right? But, what the MBA can provide is, some of that support to launch a business. Many of the top programs have incubators. There's some programs where you are required to start a business while you're there, and some provide access to funding. So it is non-traditional, but I think, if you have some ideas for what that business is going to be and, some of the skills that you bring that might make it successful, I think you can create that narrative. Just scrolling up to see if there's any others I've missed. There's a good question from Augustin here, who asks, is it a bad idea to use a non-work related situation to show qualities such as leadership within your application? No, not a bad idea at all. And you should draw from different areas of your life in your application to paint the picture for the admissions committee. So for example, one of the examples I shared on the essays was all about this candidate's experience with a nonprofit called Girls on the Run. I happen to be familiar with it because I volunteered with them too. And, this was her leadership story. This was her mentoring a young girl and bringing her out of her shell. And, those are great examples to pull from because the admissions committee is looking at the holistic candidate. They know that you're going to spend as much time outside of class, more time outside of class, getting involved with the community, with extracurriculars, et cetera. So, they are looking for passionate and engaged people who can demonstrate that they can lead in other contexts. Valerie asks, any advice for telling a cohesive story if you've had an eclectic pre-MBA career, including multiple roles in various industries? Yeah, I know this can be a challenge, especially if you're trying to fit your resume to a page. I worked with one candidate last season. She had a lot of years of work experience and several different roles across several different industries. So, what you have to do is be very judicious, on the resume. And, of course, as you're telling the arc of your career and where you want to go, talk about the things that are going to set you up for success in the future, right? The dynamics of the job market have changed so much, especially in the last few years, where people are changing jobs a lot more frequently. Right. So it is a lot more, accepted to be changing roles, sometimes not your choice, right, in the event of a layoff or restructuring. So, it's hard for me to give you specific advice on your particular situation, Valerie, but I have seen this done if you stick to the overall themes and tie your skills and capabilities to the feature. Lizandro asks, do business schools tend to have a preference on either taking the GMAT or GRE? Is one taken more into consideration in an application, especially if I need to make up for lower GPA? Great question about the tests. I know there's a lot of anxiety around the tests because it's probably the least fun part of the process, in my opinion anyway. If the school accepts the tests, it doesn't matter which tests you take. They are mindful that the GMAT and the GRE, and in some cases the EA, right, they offer different opportunities for people to show off their skills. If you've taken some practice tests, you probably realize like verbal on the GRE can be very difficult. Quant on GMAT can be difficult. You've got to kind of figure out which test works best for you and take it, right? Build in a couple attempts just in case you don't get the score that you want. But, I will say they don't have a preference one or the other if they accept multiple tests. Jack asks, what should an MBA resume look like? How much work experience should be on it? I will refer you to the class profiles to, understand what that professional arc looks like for each of the various programs. A lot of the top programs are averaging 5 years work experience. So the MBA resume is one page. I think that, when I'm working on resumes with my clients, we are challenged to get to a page to sometimes, but it does work out. In terms of what it looks like, start with your professional experience, work reverse chronologically from there, then include your education, include extracurriculars from your undergrad or master's program if you have completed one already, and then include a section below that for your postgraduate volunteering extracurriculars and interests as well. Chirag asks, will professional financial certification help a candidate getting into MBA finance who is an undergrad in tech? It might. I think it might help to allay any fears that the AdCom has or any questions they might have about your quant capabilities. I'd have to know a little more about which certification you're talking about. CPAs, CFAs, like sometimes get waivers out of the foundation classes for the MBA curriculum. So, those are very rigorous certifications and, can definitely, help an applicant's candidacy. So it looks like we are right at time. These have been amazing questions. So thank you guys for hanging around and asking them. You're a great group. Again, if you want to get in touch, use the QR code and check out that promo code as well. Thanks so much and best of luck with your process. We'll keep the chat open a little more if you want to grab the links, but thanks again.